Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters. And this is the show where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome to this week's episode, regular contributor Emily Kornheiser, who is one of three reps from the town of Brattleboro. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Olga. Good to be here with you today.
Good to see you. And David Gartenstein. So glad you can be joining us today.
Glad to be here. Good morning, Olga. Hi, Emily.
So for those who may not know David, he is currently running for state representative for Windham District 9, which is Tristan Tolino's seat. Tristan is in the process of stepping down. He will serve out the rest of his term, of course, but David is running against Ian Goodnow in the August 13th primary. David is currently a deputy state's attorney for Windham County, but has a host of other municipal and board experiences. And I'm just going to name a few, and I'm sure, David, I'm going to miss some, but you've been the town meeting moderator since, I believe, 2022. You've served on the school board. You've served on Brattleboro Selectboard many years, many of them also serving as chair. And so you have just this real kind of layered municipal and governmental experience. And so I'm really curious to hear how all those are feeding together as you're thinking about running for District 9.
Well, Olga, I've been working in government for more than 25 years, almost 20 years as a prosecutor, 20 years this summer. I served on select board for 6 years, 4 years as chair, town school board, high school board, and I'm currently serving as town meeting moderator, working on the Charter Revision Commission, and have been on Development Review Board for 9 years. So I have a broad and deep understanding of how government works. And it's always seemed to me that experience and knowledge of our systems is an important factor in serving our community effectively in Montpelier. Yeah. And that's why I decided to run for this state representative position this year.
So go ahead, Emily.
You sure I'll go?
Yeah.
Okay. I really appreciate you sort of naming having experience with various government systems as a key part of being ready to do this work. Because what I see, one of the things I'm really thinking about this primary season is how much turnover we're having in Windham County. The loss of Tristan Tolino, though it is not his seat, it is the voter's seat. I'm going to correct you a bit there, Olga. It's one of my little government pet peeves. It takes a lot to like get your feet under you up there, right? And there's so much information coming at you. And if you sort of like are familiar with the basics of like bureaucracy and government operations and all of that, it really gives you like a head start in thinking through all of these issues. And so I'm excited to sort of talk about the similarities and differences as we go along with the show.
Mm-hmm. I think my first question for you, David, is, there's a lot of theories about how government works, how it should work, whether it should be small and not many taxes or provide many services. There's a lot of different ways people can view government and how it's supposed to work. I'm curious what your theory or your philosophy around how a government should work and how it should or should not serve people, what that philosophy is.
The bottom line for me is that government should be accessible and transparent. So functioning in the sunshine is one of our most important values. I'm running on the Democratic ticket in the Democratic primary. And I think one of the sets of basic values that underlie that decision to run as a Democrat is that government has to have a role in ensuring equality and opportunity within our community. And I'm not a proponent of small government as that is often described in the tension between Republican and Democrat. I do, however, always recognize and work to make sure that the services we're providing are consistent with our ability to pay. All right. It was a very, very important part of my work on Select Board for 6 years, recognizing that our role on Select Board was to deliver core municipal services effectively, consistent with taxpayers' ability to pay. And it's been a significant concern as I've been canvassing these last 2 or 3 weeks. People want to see services provided. People feel strongly about having solid public schools, and people are concerned about housing and security and having substance abuse and mental health treatment that's available for everybody. But taxes are a concern for people as well. And we have to be aware of those as we're making policy decisions.
Mhm.
I hope that
Emily,
answered your question.
that's a great, thank you. It did.
I agree with everything you said, David, and I think it's a really one of the gifts I think of running for the first time is being able to say all of that with like without getting lost in the sticky wicket of the realities, right? And I miss that gift. I would like it back, please. And so I appreciate that real clarity of vision that you're bringing to this. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about over the last year or two or six is this balancing sort of what it means to represent Brattleboro and to know Brattleboro very well and the needs of Brattleboro very well with our like really comprehensive and quite extraordinary municipal services. And a community that supports our schools and has sufficiently sized schools. With the reality of much of the rest of the state, right? With no municipal services and often no one calls when someone calls 911 in some areas of the state, or schools that are tiny and deeply underfunded or deeply overfunded, and how we balance the values of Brattleboro of that like really high and meaningful degree of service with the reality of how much more would need to be spent in order to get that degree of services to the rest of the state. And so I'm curious, I'm just sort of curious your thoughts on that. Because I've found often that when we're doing, we're voting on statewide issues, and often the policies are sort of like a raising all boats policy, and Brattleboro's boat, as hard as that is to believe for so many folks who live here, because we have such challenges, like Brattleboro's boat's actually like already floating a little higher in a lot of ways. And so I'm curious your thoughts on all that, because I know at least, you work countywide, so you have a view of that.
I'm going to respond to the first part of
Mhm.
what you said about representing Brattleboro. It's important to keep the interest of Brattleboro's residents primary as a representative of Brattleboro at the state level. But it is clear that one's role as a state representative is also to look at the best interests of everybody in the state. And so that's a tension I'm sure that you've encountered in the work that you've been doing at the legislature, and it poses a real quandary. We need at the state level to make sure that resources are available to support the community as a whole and to support individual municipalities in their quest to provide services for community members. And I think that how that sugars off in any individual policy question really has to focus on that individual policy question. I
Yeah.
know uh, as you talk about the difference in services between what's provided in Brattleboro or available in Brattleboro as opposed to other towns, that's a concern that has motivated my approach to government for more than a decade, because we in Brattleboro have to provide the services that support the economy for the entire region, because we're the area's regional economic hub. So municipal services are concentrated here in Brattleboro. We need to have a significant size paid fire department. Our police agency requires a significant level of funding. We have 28 sworn officers when the police department is fully staffed. And the reason we need to have that size agency, those size support emergency services agencies, is because we're supporting the regional economy, and people commute into Brattleboro to shop, to get services, to work. And it's an important priority for me to assess whether we can develop a system where there's better revenue sharing coming back from the state to Brattleboro. We have a significant concentration here of tax exempt properties because we provide very significant social services as well. It results in the tax base, or the tax rate in Brattleboro, being way higher than the tax rate in surrounding communities. And that's exacerbated by the tax increases we're going to see this year. And I'd like to work with other similarly situated municipalities throughout the state to see whether we can develop some better sort of tax and spend system that will not burden the regional economic hubs in the way they're currently situated. It's going to be a tough lift because it would require coalition building, and then there are going to be municipalities and representatives who are not in favor. We here in Brattleboro are taxed higher than our neighbors. Because we're funding the engine for the regional economy, and it results in higher taxes for us.
Well, I hope one thing you do, if you do move forward with such a coalition, is you start with data, because I've been following the Brattleboro as the economic hub issue for a long time as a journalist, and the one thing I have not seen is good data on this, of exactly, the one data I have seen is about tax exempt properties and the impact that can have on a tax base. But it's not as clear cut data wise to say, well, Brattleboro pays higher property taxes because it's an economic hub. It also has a lot more services than other towns, a library, a fire department, things like that. It has more capacity than other towns. It also had a larger industrial base that used to support the tax base that it does not have anymore. But yet the services went in when those industrial and commercial properties were paying into the tax base. So I would just ask you, as someone who does not live in Brattleboro, in part because she can't afford it, which is why a lot of people don't live in Brattleboro, that you do find some good data, because the biggest data I have found around the economic hub, Brattleboro as an economic hub, is, oh yeah, in the 90s, a consultant came in and told us that towns like ours tend to have higher taxes because they're economic regional hubs. And that was it. And so I do just ask that if you start this, that you do get good data so that we can
So
really understand how the economy is working.
I think
Emily was
that's a
going to chime
really,
in, but
yeah.
I'm gonna just note that before I began speaking about this dynamic, um, I personally went through all of the real estate tax data for all the towns in the state.
Mhm.
And what stands out consistently is that the regional economic hubs throughout the state are similarly situated. Burlington is somewhat different because
Mhm.
Burlington has a different statutory relationship with the state government than most of the other regional economic hubs. Um, and you're correct that we provide more services. The question is, why do we provide more services? And why do we have to do that? And who do those services serve and benefit? Uh,
Well,
um, Go
I
ahead,
think it's an
Emily. I'm sorry to
interesting
interrupt.
mix. So we have municipal services here that we actually just choose because we want them, right? So like municipal garbage pickup, municipal compost pickup, municipal recycling pickup. None of our area towns have those things. And there are a lot of municipalities, even of our size, that don't have those. And so that is, and I love them. I love having them. I think it's, I think it'd be great to have them statewide because I think it actually causes like pretty significant chaos in a lot of communities that don't have them. And honestly, like a waste of fuels because, so in Burlington, for example, you'll see 6 different private contractors go to one street to pick up garbage in a single day. So I think there are sort of the choices that folks culturally in Brattleboro make about the services that they want. And then there's the services that we're essentially sort of subsidizing the rest of the county on. Our fire department, for instance, at this point, without having one professional fire department here, the volunteer fire departments in the area would not be able to function essentially because they need those mutual aid agreements that Brattleboro taxpayers subsidize. There is the tax exempt status, which is significant, but there are towns in our area that are half state park or half, that also are, have their significant amount of resources and payment in lieu of taxes or tax exemption. And then there's the question around housing, where certainly there's a lot of data that the majority of the affordable housing is in Brattleboro or in Bellows Falls in our county. And this is one of those sort of like rising ships questions for me. When we change sort of zoning and regulatory mechanisms in order to create more housing in the surrounding areas, it often doesn't make things easier for folks in Brattleboro, except ideally it's taking some of the housing burden off of Brattleboro as sort of the only provider of housing in our region. And so that's one of the sort of balances I'd make. I'll say also we've been doing a pretty significant amount of work on this revenue sharing question, and have a recent really great study from a joint fiscal office that I requested last summer to look at how other states do this. New York has a really interesting mechanism. Minnesota has a really interesting mechanism. But whatever that looks like, it's likely going to mean that more revenue is going to be needed at the state level in order to distribute it. And so I think that's how we raise that revenue is an important question.
Thank you, Emily. When's that report? You said you requested it last summer?
Oh yeah, it is available in the ether, and I can send you, in fact, not even the ether, the actual internet, the Joint Fiscal Office website, and I can send it to you to post in the show notes.
I would love that.
Great.
So, David, so you've been talking about canvassing and you've done a lot of municipal work, but I can imagine a lot of the interactions you have with people are in fairly structured environments, like a select board meeting or a school board meeting, representative town meeting. They're fairly structured environments. And with canvassing, you're probably meeting people on their doorstep in their territory. Are you hearing things about Brattleboro or state government or people's needs or fears that maybe you haven't heard before?
The things that I'm hearing from people are concerns that uh, I was aware of going into this campaign. The issue that people are most concerned about, in my experience, talking with them over these last 3 weeks at their doorsteps, is housing insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So people talk about a lot of issues. There are people who are very focused on municipal issues. We here in Brattleboro, for example, have been grappling with what's going to happen with that municipal waste collection system that we have in place, and the possibility that the curbside compost collection would stop.
Mm.
Feel very strongly that they want that program to continue, and it costs money, obviously. And so we've talked about a range of different questions. The rescue issue and the transition to rescue and how that happened has been a big concern that many people have raised. But top on the list has been housing insecurity. It's a long-term, intractable issue that we grapple with. I saw a report yesterday on Digger that indicated that fully a third of the people who are unhoused have mental health and substance abuse issues that underlie that status and that situation that they're facing. And so it reinforces for me the need to look at delivery of services as a way to respond to some of the housing issues we deal with, focusing on addressing the mental health care system and the availability of substance abuse treatment and counseling is an important focus for me. And so the discussions we've been having at people's doorsteps have transitioned to looking at that. People are also concerned, and it's no surprise. I've lived here with just a 7-year gap since 1982, and I've worked downtown almost that entire time. And people are concerned about being safe on the street, and people are concerned about others who are living on the street and asking for resources, and people feel threatened from time to time, and they raise that. And how to respond to that globally, I think, is a local, but it's also a regional, statewide, regional, and national issue. And I don't think we can respond to those issues just alone at Brattleboro and at the Brattleboro level. And I think that the state going it alone is not ultimately going to answer the question either.
What do you mean by the state going it alone?
We have statistical information indicating that a lot of the population that is unhoused is local, but it's not only local. I see different groups of people here in Brattleboro. I think that there is an extent to which the provision of extensive municipal services serves as a factor that concentrates some of those issues, homelessness, substance abuse, mental health issues here in Brattleboro, and that contributes then to the impact on the town as a whole.
So I just want
to regional solution, and when I read in Digger, and I wasn't aware of this specific statistic, that even more than people with substance abuse disorder, that a very significant proportion of the homeless population suffers from mental health issues. And I mean, I know that from my experiences with that community as a whole. I thought back to the fact that the only piece of civil rights legislation that was adopted during the Reagan administration was the Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness Act, right? And so at the same time that that civil rights legislation was adopted, we shifted to decentralized a model for provision of mental health services within the community.
Right.
And it's resulted in significant portions of the mentally ill population living on the streets.
Mhm.
And when we've shifted away, now Willowbrook really raised people's awareness in the 70s of conditions within mental health facilities. And it resulted in governmental response. And we recognize the importance of self-determination when people are making mental health care decisions for themselves. But it is not clear to me that the resources that are being dedicated to dealing with the results of mental illness within the community are directed effectively enough and are responding to the concerns that arise from that issue within our population.
Thank you. Thank you for digging into that a little deeper, David. I appreciate that.
Long answer. I'm sorry to take up so much time.
No,
No,
that's what we're here for.
Exactly.
Right.
We do have to hear from underwriters in a couple minutes, but I wanted to check in with Emily. Is there anything you wanted to add or?
A few things. I think one, that we need to, we need to continue to be able to do more than one thing at a time, right? So 1/3 of folks have mental health or substance use issues or both, right? And it's possible that some of those substance use or mental health conditions are actually from being on the street, right? Rather than the reason folks are on the street. Those things are mixed up together. That means that 2/3 of folks are without housing for primarily economic reasons, right? And so that is a much less complex issue to solve. Certainly, we know that treatment for substance use or mental health challenges is much easier when someone is housed. And, when we think about that deinstitutionalization that you're talking about, that happened during the Reagan era, that absolutely led to a spike in homelessness nationally. Like you said, it wasn't paired with the kind of community-based services that we needed and that we still don't have. And there's real questions about how to do that effectively in our community and what it would look like. And when I've asked community partners who provide those mental health services, what it would take for them to do to really do their jobs in a comprehensive way, the level of resources that they're talking about after being underfunded for decades is, it's considerable. It's a real sort of sea change in how we view the entire system. And I'm curious. I just continue to be really curious about what it would take to make a difference there, because it's, it feels like pushing a rock up a hill in a really big way. And it also, it's a tiny town and a tiny state, and we maybe can solve it, right? In a way that, say, New York might not be able to.
Thank you. So hang tight, everyone. The Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, is going to hear from some underwriters, and then David Gartenstein, Emily Kornheiser, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, our community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Representative Emily Kornheiser, who's a regular contributor to this show, and candidate for the State House, David Gartenstein, who's running in the primary for the Windham District 9 seat. And for those who may not know, the primary is August 13th. So keep that date on your calendar. Keep early voting on your calendar if that's what you do. And I want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of this show and sharing it with PEG stations around the state or other media centers around the state. And Emily, shall we remind listeners of something?
The views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the hosts and the guests, respectively, not the station or any platform, employer, friend, neighbor, or pet of the guests. I would also like to remind listeners, while I'm at it, that the early voting starts on Monday. You can request a ballot by going online to myvermontvoter.gov or something close to that. You can use the Google or the Firefox or whatever your search engine is. And you can also just go down to the town clerk's office. And so lots of ways to vote early, but you will not be mailed a ballot for the primary. You will be mailed a ballot for the general. So if you'd like to vote before Election Day, please find one of those two ways to get yourself a ballot and go for it.
Why, thank you. Although I would encourage people, unless you have a schedule reason why you need to vote super early, this is my opinion and my opinion alone, but I feel primaries are actually really the important place where you can have the most voice as a voter, because it's usually where you have the most choice as a voter. By the time things get to the general, we've kind of whittled everyone down. And so I would just encourage folks to really pay attention to who's running this season, and especially in your local elections for state Senate and state House. But that's my little soapbox, and I shall step down from it now.
I'm going to hang out on your soapbox because I
Okay.
totally, even though it's hard to fit two people in a soapbox, actually, they're quite small.
We'll
I
have
totally
to each
agree.
take a corner and balance.
I think one strategy that I hear from folks that I really like is you order your ballot now and you keep it on your kitchen table or on your refrigerator.
Oh, I like that one.
You don't vote now, but you order it so you can look at it, you can think about it, you can see if maybe there's a question on the ballot that you had no idea about, and you use that as sort of your object to do your research and take your time, and then just make sure you turn in your ballot by August 13th.
But let's remember, historically, off November elections have a troublingly low turnout. So what's most important, please, is to get out and vote, whatever your vote may be. Please get out and vote.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Emily. And now we're all three squeezed on our little soapbox. So in the first half of the show, David, we talked a little bit about your experience in state government or not state government, local government. But I'm curious, if you're elected and you go to Montpelier, while you'll be representing Brattleboro, and Emily touched on this a little bit, you'll be working with people from across the state. So you'll be one voice in a committee room of many, for example. What is your kind of approach to working in groups and advocating for your position while also trying to listen to other people's positions?
It's way important to make sure that all voices are heard and that decisions are made based upon gathering all available information and then making decisions based upon all that information that serve the public good. And it's the way that I've conducted myself in government, both in my day job and in my elected and appointed positions for almost 30 years now. So at the select board level, for example, there were issues that had significant input from the public. And regardless of the position that people were articulating, we always made sure, and I insisted, that people had an opportunity to present their positions and that they were heard respectfully, and then that decisions were made based upon sufficient time for deliberation. And the representative town meeting in Brattleboro has at any given point between 120 and 180 people, 150 or 60 people making decisions, and others participating, and contributing. And we always make sure that people get the floor in a structured manner, and then that decisions are made after full opportunity for debate and sharing of information. And I think the same principles have to apply in Montpelier, and they do apply in Montpelier. So that's the approach that I would always take. On behalf of the town of Brattleboro, or a third of the residents of the town of Brattleboro, if I'm elected, I would advocate for those positions that are most supportive of Brattleboro. But obviously, and we spoke about it at the beginning, the needs of the state also have to be considered as a whole in that position.
And I'm always fascinated too when sitting in group work, and I think Emily, you've talked about this in the past, is, you know, when you start hearing things you don't want to hear or make you uncomfortable or you disagree with, or for whatever reason, how do you sort of center yourself, for lack of a better term, so that you can still hear something that maybe is uncomfortable or maybe you don't agree with?
Well, I work within the criminal justice system, and so my day-to-day job is within an adversary system where two different positions, and sometimes totally contrasting and opposite positions that cannot be reconciled with each other, are being presented. And one needs to understand all perspectives and consider the information that's being provided by anybody who's got something to contribute, and then make a decision based upon all information that's available. So you have to be a good and respectful listener and participant. And I try to do that myself, and try to ensure that in any group setting, everybody is doing their best to adhere to that aspirational goal.
I'll say it's for me, I think it's one of the greatest gifts of serving in the legislature. While the country is becoming so much more divided and divisive, or at least it seems that way, to have a daily opportunity to be talking to folks with different perspectives than I have, and the opportunity to really realize in such a tangible way every single day that, like, you with a totally different perspective on how the world works than me also really truly want what's absolutely best for your community too. And to just like see the extraordinary different ways our different life histories and our different life paths and our different cultural context and geographic context can lead us to these just totally different visions of reality, basically. And to be able to engage with that in a curious, respectful way, gives me such faith in democracy and Vermont and the ability of our communities to figure stuff out. It's really, it's one of the things that really keeps me going up there.
As Emily was saying it before she said the word democracy, that's what I was going to say. That's what democracy is about.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I value most about democracy here in Vermont is that in many ways it's participatory democracy, right? It's not just representative democracy. I'm running for a representative seat, but I grew up in Brooklyn, and government is much more monolithic. It's a much more difficult structure to break into. When I got here in 1982, it quickly became clear to me that the state involves and its structures are built around participatory democracy. And it's one of the reasons that I got involved in the first place, because we can participate and we can make a difference.
Agreed, me too.
I'm so
Sorry,
glad
Olga.
both of you said that, because for many of us, especially like me, who this is basically where I've ever interacted with government for the most part, it's so easy to forget that nuance of participatory democracy versus just having a democracy. So thank you for naming that, David. Um, so you work in the criminal justice system, you mentioned. You have also worked or served on the school board, town and high school. I am curious. There's been a lot of conversations happening around both criminal justice and school taxes. You can start wherever you like, David, but I'm curious, what are some of the thoughts at the top of your mind right now about those two very big issues?
I'll just start with schools. Uh, I am a supporter of the public school system. So there are places within the country where there's significant endorsement of charter schools and funds being shifted out of the public education system to support charter schools. I'm in favor of a strong public school system. And there are significant places within the country where efforts are being made to politicize and to bring religious values into the public schools. I'm glad not to see those efforts happening here in Vermont, and I stand in opposition to those efforts. Some of the concerns that we've had about school-related issues have to do with school-related taxes. And while I've been canvassing the veto of the yield bill, the school funding bill, and then the override of that veto happened, and people have been expressing concerns about school taxes. Now, Emily was directly involved in doing the work in Montpelier. From what I've been able to discern, and Emily, you'll please correct me if I'm wrong. That's why we're here. Really,
I don't know if that's why we're here.
well, in part, I'm happy to be corrected. I'm happy
Sorry,
to be
go ahead.
corrected.
Go ahead.
I don't mind being contradicted and corrected. But it seems to me that the drivers of the increases in taxes have to do with what services are being provided, and then how we're raising money to pay for them. So there can't be any controversy about that. And the specific factors in terms of the services that we're paying and why they're expensive. We have increases in salaries. We have increases in health insurance costs. We have programming. There's universal meals and universal pre-K. Those are all programs and all aspects of the system, except for increased healthcare costs, that we want to support. Our teachers should be paid and compensated appropriately and have appropriate conditions, and our students should be ready to learn when they come to school, and meals and universal pre-K are essential parts of all children being ready to learn when they come into the schools. So I'm not aware that there have been significant new expenses that are being imposed on us, other than the annual increases in healthcare costs, which are a national issue that are very tough to grapple with, and then regular increases in salaries. So there are two concerns that I have now, recognizing that expenditure side of the equation. One of them is, how did we get here? Because it looks like we have naturally evolved to a system that is providing this level of service. We're not seeing any significant changes this year, but it's going to cost us 14% more to pay for it. And what that tends to indicate, it is not my goal at this point to lay criticism on things that have happened in the past, because we can't change what's happened in the past. But the way we have funded schools over the last 5 or 10 years, it would tend to suggest that now the bill is coming due, and that we've relied on money that's been coming from the federal government, and that we've relied on other excess funding. And we're now being presented with the bill for what the schools really cost. And it's problematic in a single given year to be hit with a tax increase like that, to bring the real cost in line with what the real services are. But that appears to me to be what's happened. I have one other issue, and I don't want to take up too much time because I see we're already at 10 to 9, but I have some level of concern. I'm interested to hear what Emily thinks about this, and we've not had a chance to talk about it before. It seems to me that the school consolidation has taken out part of the ordinary check and balance that we would otherwise have. Because in my experience at select board and town and high school board, is that in every town you had administration asking for what they felt was necessary, and school board pushing back and saying, but it costs too much. And so that process was going on in every town throughout the state at the town school board level, and then regionally at the high school, the union high school district levels. And with the consolidation, that level of pushback has not really been happening in the most recent past. It's not that I'm opposed necessarily to the town school district structure that consolidates everything, but we don't have that level of give and take anymore, except at one big meeting where a huge budget is being presented. And we have not been seeing the natural cost containment pushback that you ordinarily get at the individual town level with the consolidation of the school districts. So that's another concern that I have.
I want to remind our listeners that there are at least 3 other podcast episodes about this issue. And so if you want to go deeper on schools and school funding, there are at least 3 podcasts over the last 5 months that you can go find in our archives. And then I published a Just the Facts, ma'am kind of op-ed in both the Reformer and the Commons this week to talk about this, if folks want to go look there as well. David, I think you hit on one of the most interesting issues about all of this when you talk about school consolidation and responsibility. And that is that the district consolidation, not the school consolidation, our districts consolidated. When our districts consolidate, it makes it much more possible to deliver certain services much more efficiently and effectively. Special education services just being one example, English language learning services, another, but there are, a huge host of them. And even further district consolidation would lead within a meaningful partnership with the Agency of Education, which we do not have right now, would lead to even greater efficiencies and effectiveness of services, and would help with, Margaret Atkinson is probably one of the people most eloquent about this issue, would lead to us being able to say, like, all of these kids are our kids, right? And because we see profoundly disparate outcomes and educational opportunities from town to town before we did have district consolidation. So being able to move resources between schools is really important. However, it has really disconnected a mechanism that we have, the only mechanism we really have for accountability, from the decision-making and the decision-making part of it and the funding. And so we have slowly, as you've said, evolved into a system where that is not sized right for the decision-making power that it sits. And there are a lot of directions we could go. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to sort of devolve back to the town level decision-making. It could mean that we move, up to a different level of decision making within the system, but just put a different accountability system in above and beyond voters pushing back on budgets. My understanding is, there are areas of the state that have been pushing back on those budgets so hard that they barely have schools right now. And so like the disconnect is has really different consequences in different areas of the state, but none of them are necessarily very good for our kids right now. And so I think that's a piece we're going to need to dive in really hard. And it's so painful and controversial and personal for folks. If we look at how hard Act 46 was in our area, I think that's nothing compared to what the next conversation is going to look like. And so we're going to need to like dig deep and have just the kinds of open collaborative conversations that you were talking about in the first half of the hour.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, David. Any thoughts on the criminal justice system that you wanted to share quickly?
Or we could have you back if 5 minutes is not enough minutes to talk about the criminal justice system.
Yeah, you'd be welcome back again. You don't have to just come back as a candidate.
I can talk about criminal justice for a long period of time. I think that at the present time, we are facing some level of dysfunctionality within the criminal justice system that is adversely impacting our public safety. And I think that the roots of that stem from a backlog within the system and failure to be able to bring about accountability and effective programming and response to criminal conduct in a way that is going to happen timely. So people are engaged in criminal conduct for a range of different reasons, but we don't have an effective system for dealing with that criminal conduct between the time that the crimes are committed and when cases are adjudicated. And so in this legislative session, pretrial supervision process was adopted. But what I learned yesterday is that it's not going into effect, except to the extent that it's funded, and it's not funded. So if we want to make a referral for pretrial supervision and monitoring, we can't do it in Windham County because there's not going to be any pilot project here to make that happen. And so we want to make sure that effective programs for monitoring and supervision are being funded. It goes back to problems with funding that we've talked about throughout this hour. I'm also significantly concerned about the lack of effective programming, both during community supervision after people are convicted and in the jails. So people who are incarcerated receive programming based upon a risk assessment, but a significant part of that risk assessment looks at the type of the crime. And so we have people who engage in 5, 10, 15, 20 different criminal offenses, and they may be considered generally to be low-level offenses, and programming is not available to them in the jails. And
can I just, sorry, quick clarifying question. By jail, do you mean pre-trial incarceration?
No,
and by, okay, you mean it as like a, okay, because sometimes people say jail for pre-trial and prison for post-trial, and I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you're saying. Okay.
We have one system of prisons.
Okay.
There's local lockup.
Yeah. Okay.
People may be held in police stations, but otherwise the
Okay.
population is housed the same at, what is it, 5 or 6
Yes.
Facilities within the state.
Right.
There should be, to the extent people are being held pre-trial and to the extent that people are post-conviction, there there should be better programming in place. And to a large extent, programming in the facilities is directed towards people who are convicted of listed crimes. So it's a 1.5-page list of offenses that are deemed by the legislature, by the statutes, to be serious crimes. So people oftentimes want to see their the nature of their offenses amended as part of plea negotiations, and that happens. But a person who's broken into a house or into a structure for the purposes of committing another crime, a theft or an assault, that's a burglary. It's only the people with burglary occupied dwelling who are going to get programming in the facility. And so if it's not a listed crime, people are not on the priority list for programming in the facilities. And it means that to the extent that people are getting punitive sentences, that they're being incarcerated for part of the structure of the sentence, many of them aren't getting effective programming. The substance abuse programming in the jail is not comprehensive like it should be. And substance abuse programming in the community in Vermont also is not comprehensive like it should be. When people want to get long-term programming, they need to go out of state here in Vermont. And so those are real priorities for me, to try to see better programming that will allow and facilitate people breaking out of that cycle of criminal conduct so that they can re-engage as contributing members of the community without creating risk or harm to others. And that's ultimately the goal of the criminal justice system. So that's my nominally short answer. It took us right to 9 o'clock. I don't know if we're stopping right now. You want to talk about it some other time? Love to do so.
Okay, fantastic, David. Yes, unfortunately, we are out of time. But I do want to check in, David. Do you have a website, or is there a way for people to contact you if they want to talk to you about your candidacy? Or
I am developing my website this weekend.
Okay.
So my 32-year-old son is in town, so we're going to put that together. I am canvassing and going door to door, and always willing to communicate with people about any issues that they want to talk about. And thank you very much for having me on today. It was an interesting discussion.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, David. And Emily, where can people go if they want to reach out to you?
Folks can go to emilykornheiser.org and find all of my donation information, as well as my sort of comments on the comprehensive platform and the work I've been doing so far. And then I think we're also all three, along with a few other people, going to be at a candidate forum.
Yes.
Sometime very soon. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. I don't know if
anyone else does. It is July 8th. July 8th at Brooks Memorial Library. I believe it starts at 6 o'clock. And yeah, we'll go for about 2 hours. I'm moderating, and everyone who is on the Democratic ticket for the primary will be there for Brattleboro. And yeah, it should be a lively discussion. I'm looking forward to it. So that's July 8th, everybody, at Brooks Memorial. As always, thank you for joining us. The Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, every Friday afternoon and rebroadcast on Wednesday mornings. You can find us wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. And hey, everybody, have a good weekend.